Hello Year 6, it's Mrs Jones here. I'm the Head of English at Kelvin Hall School, and today I'm just going to take you through an introduction to English. So some little introductory activities, giving you a flavour of some of the lessons you'll be doing in September. So we're going to be looking at a lesson called Reading for Pleasure, and we're also going to look at some contextual knowledge, which means looking at the world a text was written in, what was going on at the time, and how that might inform the text. Now, we always begin a lesson with a do now activity at Kelvin. So as you enter the room, there'll be an activity on the board, and that is for you to get on with as the teacher's setting up the lesson. So let's have a go at one. So could you work out the 9-letter word in this anagram grid? And can you also list as many 3-letter words, or words with more than 3 letters would be great, as you can. So you can do this in your booklets on your lined paper. Your teacher could pause the lesson here, and you could spend maybe 1 minute getting as many words as you can, but I'm also looking for the 9-letter word. I'll pop the answers up on the next slide. Okay, well done to anybody that got the 9-letter word, which was character. And I'm sure all of you have got some other interesting words, 3 letters or more. You could maybe discuss those with your class. Okay, so let me talk you through English lessons at Kelvin then. So here at Kelvin, you'll have 5 English lessons every week, but there's lots of variety in what we do. So we try to keep it fresh and interesting, and we do something different every day. So we have reading for pleasure lessons, where we read a book, a novel as a whole, and we do lots of work on character and on themes and predicting what the plot might be. And it's, as it's in the title, it's hopefully pleasurable. Mastery writing, this is where we work on our writing skills, so looking at descriptive writing, looking at story writing, and looking at punctuation, grammar, and sentence forms. We also do lessons called literary heritage, which is basically texts from across many different years by lots of different writers. The first one you'll come to study is Oliver Twist, written by Charles Dickens, and we're going to do some activities linked to Oliver Twist in just a minute. And we also do something called accelerated reading. Some of your primary schools might already do this. Accelerated reading is when you get to go down to the library and choose a book that interests you, and it's set at your kind of ability to challenge you to improve your reading. And then once you've finished a book, you do a quiz on it, and that tells your teacher, are you reading the book? Are you taking it in? Are you understanding the themes, the characters? So that's a really popular lesson too, because we actually have 2 full hours a week completely dedicated to reading, which is a real treat. Okay, so today we're going to look at some contextual tasks and some reading activities. So let's get started. So in this lesson, we're going to become masters in all of these things. I won't read them all out to you, but we're going to look at the Victorian era. We're going to look at why that era was called that, because it was Queen Victoria was in reign. We're going to look at Britain being the most powerful nation, and a little bit about the lives of Londoners at the time. Okay, so the Victorian era then. The first thing I would like you to do is place the Victorian era within lots of other eras, okay? So look at those boxes at the bottom, and I'd like you to put those in order put those periods of history in order, starting with the oldest, okay? So what happened first, all the way up to what happened closest to modern day. Again, your teacher could pause the lesson here, do that order in your booklets, and then I'll reveal the answers on the next slide. Okay, then, here we go. So first of all, dinosaurs walked the earth, followed by the ancient Egyptians. The Romans came next. Then there were Vikings, the Victorians, World War II, and your lifetime. So well done to anybody that got the order right. Okay, let's have a little look at Queen Victoria then. So there's Queen Victoria in the top left-hand corner as a young woman. This is when she, was fairly new to being queen. And this is a little excerpt from a letter that she wrote, explaining how she came to know that she was queen. And she says, I was awoke at 6 o'clock by Mama, who told me the Archbishop of Canterbury and Lord Conyngham were here and wished to see me. Lord Conyngham then acquainted me that my poor uncle, the king, was no more and had expired at 12 minutes past 2 this morning, and consequently that I am queen. And that was written on the 20th of June, 1837, when Victoria was only 18 years old. So she started her reign as queen at a relatively young age. And then the bottom picture is obviously a portrait of Queen Victoria in her later life. And Queen Victoria died on Tuesday, the 22nd of January, 1901, at the age of 81. And apart from our current Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, Queen Victoria is the longest reigning British monarch. So she reigned for over 63 years. So a huge chunk of her life was spent being queen. Now, when you come to Kelvin Hall, we'll be reading, as I've said, the first text, Oliver Twist, written by Charles Dickens. And you might already be familiar with this story. You might have even seen some film adaptations of it. Now, before we start reading this novel, and before we start reading any novel, we always learn a little bit about what the world was like where the novel was set. So we need to learn a little bit about the Victorian era and what life was like during this time, because this is where the majority of the novel takes place, particularly in the city of London. So I'm going to read some information to you now. I'll leave it on the screen, and I'd like you to be making some notes in your booklets on your lined paper, and I'm going to test you on this knowledge shortly. Okay, so I'll pause after each slide, and your teacher can pause the video, give you a little bit of time to jot any key notes down, and then we'll move on. So the Victorian era is a period in British history named after Queen Victoria, who was Britain's queen from 1837 until 1901. During her reign, Britain was the most powerful nation in the world. Britain ruled many other countries in the world. Collectively, they were known as the British Empire. At the height of the British Empire, British ports were full of ships arriving from across the world carrying goods that were bought and sold. Trade with the empire made Britain rich. This wealth led to advances in science, technology, and culture. Okay, so your teacher could pause the video here and give you a little bit of time to jot some notes down. Let's continue reading. A sprawling metropolis. Victorian London was the largest city in the world for much of that time. London had lots going on. The city was bustling with markets and music halls, breweries, factories, theatres and department stores. Many of London's most famous buildings and landmarks were built during the 19th century, including Trafalgar Square, the Houses of Parliament, Tower Bridge and Victoria Station. And there's a very old photograph of the Houses of Parliament still standing today. Again, your teacher could pause the lesson here and give you a little bit of time to jot down any key notes in your booklets. And finally, a growing population. The wealthy capital attracted many people. Between 1800 and 1900, the population grew from about 1 million people to 6.7 million. This surge in the population put a strain on the capital's resources. The city quickly became overcrowded and polluted. Victorian London became well known for its fog, which was often extremely thick. The fog was often known as a pea souper because of its green colour. Apparently, people regularly walked into the River Thames because they couldn't see where they were going. And there's a little picture, and the bottom right, the thick fog are nicknamed a pea souper because it's so thick and green you can't really see in front of you. Proper running water and proper toilets were rare. A lot of waste went straight into the Thames. People would still use the water from the river to drink. Drinking this dirty water caused a nasty killer disease called cholera. When a place is so dirty that it causes disease, we say that it is unhygienic. Victorian London was a very unhygienic place. There was no proper running water and there were no proper toilets. Okay, so again, pause the lesson here, jot some notes down, and then I'll be asking you to answer the questions on the next slide. Okay then, in pairs, I would like you to use your notes to discuss these questions. When was the Victorian era? What were the positive things about Victorian London? And also, what were the negative things? So your teacher could pause the lesson video here, discuss in a pair, with your partner the answers to these questions, and I'll pop up the answers in a second. Let's see what we can remember. Okay, let's see what answers we got. So the answer to number 1, the Victorian era was from 1837 to 1901. So well done for those of you that remember those key dates. And there were many good things about Victorian London, so you could have had any of the ones on the board. It was the largest city in the world. London had bigger and more shops, markets and theatres than anywhere else in Britain. Lots of London's most famous buildings and landmarks were built there. London showcased advances in science and technology to the rest of the world. London grew quickly and lots of people wanted to live there. So all positives. The negatives, on the other hand, it became overcrowded. There was a constant fog caused by pollution. Well done if you remember that it was called, in a nickname, the pea super. It was unhygienic as there were no proper toilets or running water. And there was a huge difference in the quality of life between the rich and the poor. So there were some of the things you could have had based on the information we've just looked at. Okay, let's test your knowledge again then. So this time I would like you to put your hands in the air. Okay, so there are 5 options here. And I would like you to tell me which statements about Victorian London are correct. So for example, if you think it's number 2, I'd like you to raise 2 fingers. If you think it's number 4, 4 fingers. If you think it's more than one of the answers, you could put 2 hands up, so 2 and 5. Okay, so your teacher could pause the lesson video here. Which ones of these are correct? I won't read them all out. I'll let you have a look, and we'll reveal the answers on the next slide. Okay, well done to those of you who got this. It was number 1 and number 3. There were lots of nasty diseases caused by dirt and overcrowding, and the Victorian era was from 1837 to 1901. So well done to those of you who got those right. So that gave you a flavour of what we do before we read a text. So before we get into a story, we look at what the world was like as the text was being written. So you already know a little bit about Victorian England now, and maybe that's building upon knowledge that you already have from primary school, which is brilliant. You will be revisiting Oliver Twist and all the context we've just looked at about Victorian England when you come to us in September. So hopefully some of you are already at a head start there, and you'll be able to remember the answers to some of those questions. Let's move on now then to a little bit of an accelerated reading lesson or some activities linked to reading. So when we're in our reading for pleasure lessons, we all read the same book together. But in accelerated reading lessons, we choose our own books which suit our individual ability and interests. So let's have a look at how we actually choose a book. You know, we all have our preferences. Some of us like books that make us laugh. Some of us like books that are romantic, that make us cry, that transport us to another world, like a fantasy text. But how do we make those choices? Well, we often use clues. When we're choosing to read a book, we use the covers very often to give us clues, and they help us to work out perhaps what age group the book is for, the genre of the story, whether it appeals to a particular gender or genders maybe, and what the plot might involve. You might get some clues from the front cover about what this story actually might be about. So let's look at an example together then. So this is a front cover of a very famous novel called The Golden Compass, which is one of Philip Pullman's Northern Lights, one of the books in his trilogy Northern Lights. And I would like you to jot down on your paper the age of the reader. Who do you think would be attracted to reading this book? What age? What genre do you think the book belongs to? Do you think it's romance, horror, fantasy, detective thriller? Do you think a particular gender would be attracted to the front cover of this book? And finally, can you make any kind of predictions about what the plot might be about? So your teacher could pause the lesson here and spend 5 minutes or so answering those questions. And you could discuss those as a class, and then we'll move on to the next activity. So you've done one and discussed it. So let's have a look at these other 4 book front covers. Let's make some notes about these covers and what clues they reveal now. So we've got 4 very different book front covers, and I would like you to think about who might read these books, who would be attracted to them, what age, what gender possibly, what might be going on in these books, what kind of genre. Okay, so genre like the topic. You know, perhaps the second one I'm thinking it might touch upon horror or a thriller. You know, I'm getting that vibe from the front cover. Again, pause the lesson video here and Make some notes on who would be attracted to reading these books based on those clues. Let's think about what else can help us choose a book then. After looking at the front covers, I'd like you to answer these questions. What do we call the information on the back of a book? I'll reveal the answer in just a second, so hopefully your teachers had time to take some answers. It's called a blurb. And what's important about how blurbs are written? Again, your teacher could take some feedback here. What does a good blurb contain? Well, a blurb is the short yet descriptive account of the book that goes on the back cover. The blurb should include any information that represents the book best and intrigues the reader. So it's important that a blurb doesn't give all the information away, or else there would be no point in reading the book. But it's got to hook the reader and give some key information away, just enough to get us, intrigued in the plot line. Do we recognise this blurb then? So I've taken this blurb from a very famous young person's novel. I've blanked out some of the words that I think would give this away. So I'll read it to you. Let's see if we can work out where this is from. 12-year-old blank blank is on the most dangerous quest of his life. With the help of a satyr and a daughter of Athena, blank must journey across the United States to catch a thief who has stolen the original weapon of mass destruction, Zeus's master bolt. Along the way, he must face a host of mythological enemies determined to stop him. Most of all, he must come to terms with a father he has never known and an oracle that has warned him of betrayal by a friend. Okay, teacher could pause here. Any ideas where this book blurb is from? I'm sure lots of you got this. This is Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, really popular young person's novel by Rick Riordan. I'd like you to think, though, which book cover is most appealing to you? So the one on the left or the one on the right? So maybe discuss this in partners. Your teacher, again, could pause the lesson here. Which one is most interesting and intriguing to you, and why? Okay, our final activity then is looking at something called Bookflix, which is similar to Netflix, where you scroll through lots and lots of different programs. This is where you scroll through lots and lots of different books. I'd like you to choose a book that has a cover which appeals to you. So there are lots to choose from on the board there. Choose a cover that appeals to you. And what I would like us to do is write the blurb to the book you've chosen. So you might not know exactly what happens in it. I'd like you to use the clues on the front cover to write the blurb. You'll need to imagine, using the cover's clues, the following things. So I'd like your blurb to include these things: what genre the story is, who the main characters are, where it's set, what the plot outline is. But remember, don't give all the plot away. Often blurbs end with an ellipsis with ... because it finishes halfway through the action, and then you're left wondering, well, what on earth is going to happen? And that would make you choose the book and read it. So you could have a go at planning a blurb as a class first, if you would prefer, or you could go ahead and choose one of your own. I will leave that up to your teachers. So if you pause the lesson video here, this is our final task. You could spend maybe 10, 15 minutes on this, and you could write this in your booklets on your lined paper. Well, I hope that's given you a flavour of the kind of thing you might be doing in September in English at Kelvin Hall. And hopefully you'll be able to see me as a familiar face when you join us in September. Okay, so I was Mrs. Jones. Have a great summer, Year 6. Bye-bye.